Hello, this is Babamots. In the year 2000, my parents got me two particularly important Christmas gifts. The first one was a card game called Flux version 2.1. The second gift was this box of jewel-like pyramids that was mysteriously named Ice House, the Martian Chess Set. Now, I played Flux with my family once in a while, and then later on I really enjoyed Flux. This one year in high school, I played with friends almost every day at lunchtime. The pyramids were also very interesting to me. They came with rules for playing 4 games: Martian chess, ice towers, ice traders, and Zarkana. My brother and I also looked up the rules for more games online, and we played a few dozen of them. I was quite enthusiastic about the pyramids and Flux, and so I ended up ordering most of the rest of the Looney Labs catalog. My senior year of high school, I turned my chess club into a Pikeman, Zendo, and Cosmic Coasters club. And then for a few years of college, I played Werewolf every chance I got. And it was about this time that John Cooper, who invented Ice Traders, developed that game into a new game called Homeworlds. I had been following the Looney Labs news blog, and I read about this game Homeworlds, and I was a little bit skeptical. I had the sense that Ice Traders was a clunky game. It wasn't my favorite of the pyramid games I've tried. But I was worried that this derivative rule set called Homeworlds would be less good. In Ice Traders, only the red pieces cause catastrophes that destroy lots of stuff. Overpopulations of the other colors have different effects. One of my favorite things in Ice Traders was getting blue ships together, which, instead of causing a catastrophe, would actually add a new technology to the system. That was the way that you could make binary stars. And it seemed very weird to me that stars would just disappear from the map. In Ice Traders, stars are permanent, and it seemed more like you were playing on a board. The stars in Homeworlds seemed very ethereal. So I wasn't all that optimistic about liking Homeworlds, but I also saw that Andy has a web page that makes a very good sales pitch for Homeworlds. So I didn't want to dismiss it completely without giving it a good trial. But in college, I was pretty focused on working, and I wasn't really seeking out game people. But the pyramids, and Homeworlds in particular, were always something that I wanted to get back to at some point. They were in the back of my mind. Then fast forward to 2016, I had moved to Virginia, and I was very excited when Looney Labs announced that they would be throwing a convention relatively nearby in Maryland. It was still a 5-hour drive for me, but that's way closer than when I was in Albuquerque a few months earlier. I had never been to a game convention before, but a small, single-company convention didn't sound too intimidating. I was mostly interested in going to play some Rambots and Pikemen, see what new things were being developed, maybe learn some new pyramid games. Andy and John were at the convention, and they were scheduled to have a Homeworlds show match. And I thought that this would be a great chance to see how the game plays and to form a firmer opinion. I really like keeping lists and records, so I also decided to make a record of the show match. I relearned the rules well enough that I knew what kinds of moves to expect, and I sort of made up some notation so that I could act as a scribe. In some photos of the match, you can just see me in the back taking notes. Now, I may have read Andy's blog post a few months earlier, where he said that he was going to start handing out medals to people who beat him at Homeworlds, but I think that somehow I had known that this was his intention even earlier than that. But I definitely heard people mentioning this medal program at the convention. One other really important thing from the convention was that I actually played one game of Homeworlds, and it was a lot of fun. Between watching the show match and enjoying my first game and hearing about these medals that were going to get handed out, I decided that beating Andy was going to be on my bucket list. I wanted to learn this game. Another important thing was that my opponent in that game informed me that Homeworlds could be played online on Super Duper Games. So now I had a place that I could practice. Now I still don't know why, but somehow, sometime in the past, I had actually created a Super Duper Games account already. I had never actually played a game on the site, though. After LooneyCon, though, I started playing Homeworlds pretty frequently on SDG, and about a year later, somebody online said something about we really ought to have a Homeworlds tournament. And nobody else showed any signs of organizing a tournament, so I went for it. And I used an assortment of Google Doc products to post rules for the tournament and to keep track of results, and it was a lot of fun. For the next 3 years, I kept on playing on Super Duper Games and organizing summertime tournaments. And then it was 2020, and everything got weird because of the pandemic. One of the effects was that Gen Con that year was held online, and Looney Labs scheduled some time at Gen Con to hang out with fans and to play some of Andy's Parsley games. And I tuned in to play through some of those Parsley adventures. And Andy asked me if I was ready to play Homeworlds with him. I had filled out a form sometime earlier to register my interest in playing a game with Andy. I had not planned on playing a game that day, and I'm the type of person who doesn't even like to go grocery shopping without deciding that a day ahead of time. But I didn't know when I'd have the chance again, so we played a game. Here now is a playthrough of my medal game with Andy. I won the coin toss to go first. I picked a red banker, and Andy took a yellow Goldilocks. Now, I had read years ago on Andy's page about Homeworlds that he liked red-blue systems, and so this surprised me quite a bit. We both build, then I traded for the little blue. Andy did as well. Since we both did, we both get early medium ships. I traded for yellow right away, but Andy spread out his blue. I pushed my blue forward as well, keeping him from doing a blue shopping spree. Andy switches to building a green. I built more yellow. This is about the time when I was at my height of excitement about the need to dominate the yellow economy, so I might be pursuing it more than I really should. Andy trades for yellow, making sure he doesn't get left out. I spread my yellows out. Andy advances his yellow as well. I build more green. Andy builds more green. And here, let me see if I saw that right. I built a yellow. Yes, I built a small yellow. Andy will get that opens up the medium yellows for Andy. He takes it. And now there's a medium if I feel like it. I do. I build it there in my colony. Andy spreads out his yellows so that he'll have the first chance to build large if I don't do anything about it, but I trade for red at this point. Andy trades his small green at home for red. And at this point I decided to spread out my yellows, preparing for a yellow shopping spree. Andy advances his medium blue to take one of those large yellows out of the bank to keep my shopping spree from being quite so productive. But here I go ahead and do the shopping spree, clean out the yellows, and pick up medium blue. And I was quite pleased with this move, I remember, because having taken so much of the blue, and there's a large blue left in the bank, but Andy can't build it at home or in this colony. Can't build it at home because he'd be too close to overpopulation, and can't build it in this colony because he'd have to sacrifice the mothership. So I was very pleased with myself until Andy traded this B2 for green. And this turns suddenly into an investment where Andy is prepared to build this large yellow as a ship. I don't have a good avenue to getting an additional large ship of any kind, and I thought about this move for a very long time. Andy said, "You gonna make a move there?" And I said, yeah, I'm thinking. And I ended up making what I think is my worst move of this game. I'm going to sacrifice this blue 2 to trade. What do I trade? I trade this yellow 2 for green, and I trade one of my home yellows for green. And so with doing that, I lost material. I came down by a medium ship, and I lost blue and yellow, which are the colors I'm eventually going to want to destroy Andy's home star. So I think that was actually quite a poor move, but that was my choice at the time. Andy now picks up a medium red. I do as well. Andy spreads out his reds, getting ready to build more. He's pretty close to having a shopping spree ready. I decide at this point that I really, really want to prevent this investment from going forward. So looking back here, Andy actually could have, instead of fiddling with the reds, Andy could have sacrificed this G2 to build the Y3 and a Y1. Like, he could have come up by a large ship. But instead we parried with the reds for a bit, and at this point I decided, no, I've got to keep this investment from ever going anywhere, and moved my little green there just to plug up the investment. Andy, rather than sacrificing to capture it immediately, advances a red ship, and so I counterattack at his colony. And now, okay, let's see what's happened here. Andy moves that little yellow away to discover a big green ship. And I remember thinking, I'd been playing on Super Duper games and hadn't really seen anything quite like this, where my opponent insists on stationing everything at large stars to play keep away really aggressively. I think I felt a little flustered by that. So here I sacrifice my green 2 to build 2 reds, leapfrogging over the medium and getting a large here in my colony for defense. Andy, of course, can take one of those large reds, but I think I didn't anticipate that he would build both. I think I had it firmly locked in my mind that Andy would keep that green for that investment. But instead he sacrifices the green 2 to build 2 reds, and I can't remember, do I overpopulate these 2 at home? No, I trade. Okay, actually I think I anticipated that he could build 2, and so I said, all right, well, I'll put a red 3 back in the bank that Andy can't build, and I can simply build it myself on my turn. Andy sacrifices the small red to capture this little green. That small sacrifice clogs the bank so that I can't build the large red. And it also keeps Andy's reds at home from being so vulnerable to catastrophe. I could have sacrificed Y2 to move in my two mediums to destroy one of his larges. That might have been worthwhile. But instead, here we are. Now, so Andy gets this capture, and now I decide to defend my reds at this colony instead of this more diverse colony. Also puts a blue closer to the front line with Andy, which seems fairly good, I think. Andy now moves out his large red. He has the large ship advantage, and this colony no longer has a large defender, so it's an attractive target for Andy to invade. I cause a little bit of a disruption here by building another blue. If these two ships move into Andy's home, of course Andy's down by a star, and while that's quite a bit of a material investment from me, Andy decides that he doesn't want that to happen, and so he spreads out his blues. And now, I think with the intention of moving my blues in one at a time to Andy's home, I take that little yellow out of colony 6 and put it in 3. I think better might have been for me to move my medium yellow out of this colony, since Andy is about to invade. And that would have been one less ship for Andy to capture in this system. Now here I felt pretty frustrated and wasn't very sure what to do. And as a way to feel like I had some kind of control over the game still, more than because I actually thought it was the very best move, I decide to sacrifice the Y2 to move my little blue all the way over into Andy's home. And Andy could just ignore this without a lot of consequence, since I'm just going to be moving my blues in one at a time anyway. I could, instead of using one of the blues I already have, I could sacrifice my little green to build a blue there if Andy ignores it completely. But instead, Andy does decide to capture. They sacrifice their medium red to capture both the small red in the colony they just invaded and the little blue that I just sent to Andy's home. Then I did the thing that I think is the expected thing, moved in my B3. At least the expected thing if a star demolition is the objective. Move in the B3. Andy sacrifices the little red he'd just captured in order to capture my B3. Then I move in the B2 for the overpopulation, and Andy is down by 1 star. So here, I've just spent most of my material, I think nearly half of my material, to destroy just one of Andy's stars. And while I have some yellow, it's not enough to finish the job. And Andy remarked later that he thought I had really made quite a rookie mistake. I see this all the time with new players. They spend everything they've got to destroy just one home star, and they don't have any kind of plan for the second one. I had sort of a plan, but I need some more yellow to do it. But Andy, I think, underestimated how quickly I was going to be able to get everything in gear and invade for the second star, because Andy right now should invade my colony, even though I could overpopulate Andy's reds if Andy moves in right this minute. Andy should move in anyway. But Andy, I think, felt comfortable and thought, all right, just rebuild and prepare to dominate the whole game. And he just casually builds a small green. I built one of my another little yellow because yellow's what I need to win here. And Andy, I think, thought that that was a rather innocuous reconstruction move. Didn't realize that it was practically a check. And Andy again passes up the opportunity to invade and even out the game. Just builds medium yellow. And at this point, everything is all ready to go. I can move in my yellow ships one at a time. I move in the little yellow, which Andy really has to capture because otherwise I'm going to sacrifice green to build another yellow. And Andy sacrifices, after a lot of thought, I believe, very reluctantly sacrificed an R3 to capture my little yellow. Then I moved in my large yellow, preparing either to catastrophe Andy's star by moving in the last little yellow, or if Andy ignores this, or if, well, I guess honestly, Andy doesn't have anything he can do about this. Capturing for me is not the way to go. If Andy were to invade my home, the fact that Andy neglected to capture my Y3 in his home is not going to be relevant. I'm not going to be able to capture everything he's got. Andy doesn't have any way to stop this little yellow from coming to his home, so instead Andy sacrifices the Y2 here in this colony in order to push a couple of greens into my home, but Andy can't quite get 3 greens for the winning over population because Andy didn't have a Y3 to sacrifice. And so I sacrifice R2 in order to capture Andy's 2 remaining ships at home. Andy had moved one of them out. And it's a little confusing how it looks on this interface because System 2, which is Andy's home, then gets moved down to here after the captures take place. Anyway, so that's how my medal game with Andy went. Andy was understandably frustrated to have lost that way, but I was over the moon. That night, my wife and I celebrated with a pizza that was so big that we had to turn it sideways to get it in the door. And shortly after that, Andy obligingly sent me a very fine medal in the mail, and it is among my most treasured possessions. So now I had a medal from Andy, and it took me a little while to figure out what I wanted to do next for Homeworlds. I am absolutely convinced that Homeworlds is as good a game as chess, and I think that it deserves to have a similar supporting infrastructure. In particular, Homeworlds needed a more welcoming online presence. Typing commands into super-duper games is all well and good, but I thought there was a big potential audience that would prefer to use a mouse or a touchscreen to play. And I wanted to figure out how to make a Homeworlds site, but as a warm-up exercise, I decided to make a Discord server for Homeworlds, and I whipped up a bot that would let you play Homeworlds against other people on the Discord server by typing commands, just like on Super Duper games. The bot would draw the board and keep time and make sure that you stuck to the rules. But no sooner did I release my Homeworlds moderating bot than I got a message inviting me to try out a new website. That website was Homeworlds Live. Another Homeworlds fan had made an actual website that was just for playing Homeworlds in real time. So my Discord bot was outmoded immediately. There was some pretty good buzz when Homeworlds Live opened, and a few games got played there most days for a while. The site has a few drawbacks. it is for live play only, and it's pretty tough for me to set aside time to play a live game. Another issue is that no one was really just hanging out on the site waiting for an opponent to show up, so you would have to use some other means of communication to arrange a time to play with your opponent. And also for growing the Homeworlds community, I thought that it would be better if Homeworlds appeared on a platform that already had a big audience that could notice Homeworlds as they just went about their online gaming business. And so I looked at several existing systems. Most of the systems where you can make a custom game do not enforce the rules. These are things like Tabletopia, Tabletop Simulator, and Anywhere board games. The systems that do enforce the rules are, of course, much harder to write for, and most of these did not accept submissions from external developers. These are sites like boardspace.net and Yokata. Board Game Arena, on the other hand, looked perfect. They take submissions from developers, and it runs in a browser without requiring any download, and their user base had really just exploded during the pandemic. But on the other hand, development for Board Game Arena looked to be very difficult. And so at that time, thoughts of developing another version of Homeworlds drifted to the back of my mind, and I focused on using Homeworlds Live for a live tournament. And at about that time, I started dabbling in making gameplay videos. I made several videos during that live tournament, and I wanted to have live cast games on a frequent basis with guest co-commentators and sound effects and other fancy features that you might see on professional video game streams. But casting live games requires schedule coordination, and I usually don't know when I will be available from one minute to the next. So I ended up making slow game review videos whenever I found myself with some spare time. And if you're watching this, then you have probably seen some of those videos. I do still prefer casting live games when I can, since they keep me from going off on tangents for too long, but that's usually pretty difficult. Not long after my first video efforts, I happened to notice that Looney Labs had given license permissions to Board Game Arena for Homeworlds to get developed, and that set off some kind of alarm in my head. If Homeworlds was just sitting on that list of games that are up for grabs, somebody's going to develop it. And if somebody else was developing it, then the interface that they come up with might not be quite what I would want. So I decided that I had to stake my claim, start developing Homeworlds, and if I actually managed to finish the project, then I would make sure that the interface was exactly like I wanted it to be. I started learning what it would take to get a game on Board Game Arena, and I ran into 6 problems very quickly. Those were PHP, and JavaScript, and SQL, and HTML, and CSS, and Board Game Arena's rather wild development framework. I had very, very limited experience with any of those languages, and Board Game Arena's framework was totally alien to me. But a sufficiently obsessed nerd can do surprising things. After a lot of hard work and feedback from people who tried the alpha version, the result is an interface that is exactly what I envisioned, and I hope you like it too. Oh, and at some point I started pretending to be some kind of expert, and I wrote a strategy guide. It is ugly, and it would benefit from way more diagrams and formatting, but some people have said that they found it helpful, and so it must be better than nothing. So anyway, that is the intersection of my life story with Homeworlds. And if you have watched this far, then you might actually be interested enough to be wondering why I made this video. This video is going out on June 30th of 2023, which is the 3rd anniversary of my Medal Challenge game with Andy. The past 2 years I forgot about it, and I did not notice when the anniversary went by. And this time I'm celebrating with a rambling, self-indulgent video. And you just watched it. happy metalversary to me.